Greetings everyone. This is a quick promo before the video begins. If you're new to the channel and you didn't know it yet, I am actually an author in addition to being a YouTuber, and I have 2 books that you can get on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1 and The Occult Mafia. The first is sort of a bizarre, absurdist kaiju anime mashup, and the other is a horror noir story with a hint of a western thrown in there. They're both set in the same universe, and at this point have received mostly positive reviews, so you might want to check them out. I've provided Amazon links for both of them down in the description. They're both available in either paperback or Amazon Kindle, and Operation Red Dragon is also available in audiobook form. So if either of these strike your fancy and you want to support a struggling artist, feel free to go down and check out either one or both of them. Alright, the shameless self-promotion is out of the way, we can get on with the video. Thank you all for your support. Hello, nurse, and ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and I'm here to share my thoughts on what I've seen so far of the Animaniacs reboot. I mean, I have been talking about it recently, not to mention I did that retrospective of the original series. May as well share my thoughts on it. Now, I haven't seen every episode of the reboot as yet, but I've seen enough episodes that I can kinda get the gist. I can make a pretty fair assessment of what the show is like. The short version is, it's good, but it's not nearly as good as the original. The longer version is what follows. Now, I know some of you had some concerns about how this show was going to go based on a few things we've seen up to this point, and I've had some concerns as well, certainly. But the biggest concerns were, 1, how political the show was looking to be, and 2, whether or not the show was catering to the politically correct crowd. Or, to put it in other terms, whether or not the modern Animaniacs had gone woke. I'd like to address both of those up front before I get into more detail about the rest of the show. As far as it being political, even I addressed that the original series and its spin-off Pinky and the Brain, they didn't shy away from getting political, but it wasn't really the driving force of it. They'd feature political caricatures, and they were pretty good at doing it across the board. They poked fun at the left, they poked fun at the right, they poked fun at whoever they wanted to, really. And as far as the reboot goes, I do think that it is slightly more political and slightly more biased towards the left. That being said, though, it's still not the driving force. It's still not necessarily prevalent. And just because they incorporate certain political figures doesn't necessarily mean they're trying to do anything political. One of the Pinky and the Brain episodes, for example, has a plot that involves Edward Snowden. But it doesn't really make any statements about Edward Snowden, one way or the other. They just incorporate him as a recognizable figure and find a way to do something ridiculous with him. And it feels like something that would have been done on the Pinky and the Brain solo series. So, as far as that goes, it's on point with the original. But there are other times where they are clearly going for the whole Trump is a Russian agent sort of thing. You know, the same joke that we've seen over and over again by this point. It's, like I said, it's not prevalent, but it is there, and it's a bit more noticeable than it was in the original series. But the only place where I saw it kind of go into a weird place, like a place I'm not necessarily sure it should have gone, was in an episode entitled Manny Manspreader, which I don't want to get too heavy into spoilers on that one, but the premise feels like a classic setup for a cartoon, where you have a character in a movie theater who takes up way more space than he actually needs, which includes sitting down and spreading his legs as wide as they can go, and that interfering with the Warner's ability to watch a movie, and so they fight back. But there are things within that cartoon that make me wonder exactly what the writers were trying to say, if they were even trying to say anything. And I don't necessarily think they said it very well if they were trying to say something. But that's the most egregious example that I've seen. Again, I haven't seen every episode. But of the ones I've seen, that was the one that kind of left me thinking, what are you doing, guys? Like, that feels... I don't really feel like that worked. But of course, there's also in the opening theme, because you don't have all the returning characters, you've only got the Warners and the mice, they had to fill that in with something else. I'm sure there are people out there who have seen it and think, well, they've definitely drawn the line and they don't want me because of my political beliefs. Because they mention the stuff like gender neutral, ethnically diverse, and things like that, and then sort of seem like they're poking the audience as if they're going, yeah, what you gonna do about it, huh? But at the same time, that whole bit is preceded by lyrics which talk about how all that stuff is the result of focus group testing and how it's basically manufactured by the studio. And they mention that they're doing it in a meta way. So is it meant to be taken seriously, or is it a case where if you do take it seriously, the joke is on you? That's a little harder to read. Based on the content of the show itself, you don't really see it being focused on all that much. For the most part, the show sticks to the idea of being a sort of slapstick, knows no boundaries, anyone is fair game sort of thing. But like I said, a little more political, a little more biased, not to the point where it's all politics aimed in one direction. But if you're the sort of person who's just sick of that sort of thing, it is going to stand out to you, I think. But getting beyond that, what is the quality like? Well, like I said, I think the show is good, but it's not necessarily as good as the original. And the reason I think is that it just kind of feels, at this point, like it's going through the motions. It's like the difference between a painting that hangs in a museum, which was the beginning of a brand new art trend. It drew inspiration from the greats, but at the same time it had its own distinct style that inspired generations. And then you have another painting hanging next to it that was inspired by that painting, which is following the technique exactly, but doesn't really have anything to make it stand out on its own. This reboot kind of feels like that second painting in that allegory. Which, again, that means it's technically sound, but it doesn't really have anything to really give it that oomph factor. To paraphrase Mr. Director, it's more funny ho-ho than funny ha-ha, when it is funny. There are times where the jokes do kind of fall flat, but I do find myself thinking that the jokes usually land. But just because they land doesn't necessarily mean I'm cracking up the way I did at the original series. That does technically mean there's room for improvement, but at the same time, that means they have to improve. Whether or not they're going to, I have no control over. But I think another issue I might be having is that it doesn't quite have the same level of variety. You still have Yakko, Wacko, Da, Pinky, and the Brain winding up in different scenarios where they can do different brands of comedy against different foils, but they're the only ones carrying the show right now, with a couple of exceptions, but I'll get to them in a moment. Pretty much every other character from the original show is gone. Although, there is one episode that I'm not going to spoil just in case you haven't seen it, but it does provide an explanation that is funny yet also kind of sick and twisted as to why those characters aren't there, but also kind of leaves the door open for them to come back at some point. But that's the only time you get any reference to them at all in the whole season. Again, as far as I've seen. So, getting back on track, the fact that it is only that core group of characters does mean the show kind of falls into a pattern pretty quickly. With the original series, even though I didn't enjoy every single segment, as you can tell in the last video I made, it still provided that bit of variety that made each episode feel distinct. You could have different characters in there to shake things up. You could have different characters appear in each other's shows. You could squash them all together. You could take a handful of them and plop them into whatever scenario you wanted. That doesn't really happen in this new series because they don't have as wide a pool of characters to draw from yet. So they address that. A lot of the stuff that you might have critiques with for the show, they directly reference because Animaniacs was always a very self-aware, very meta show. Yet at the same time, the fact that they're acknowledging it doesn't change the fact that they're still doing it. And that if they want to sustain themselves and have this be another really great series, they gotta make some changes for the seasons to come, if there are seasons to come. But are there any new characters at all? Yes. I don't know necessarily how many there are, but I did manage to see 2 of the new segments. And on the off chance you don't want to have them spoiled, jump to this time to get away from it. But before you do that, I will say, in short, these segments feel just a little bit out of step with the rest of the show. That doesn't necessarily mean, well, I basically have to get into details in order to explain my thoughts. So again, if you want to avoid the spoilers, jump to this time. Otherwise, here it goes. So the first of the new segments, again, that I saw, is called Starbucks and Cindy, which the premise for that is explained in its opening music. You have this fleet of alien invaders that fly across the universe looking for planets to invade and destroy all the life on. They are led by Starbucks, who goes ahead of the fleet. He lands on any new planet that looks promising, and if he determines it is good for invasion, he sends a signal to the rest of the fleet so they can come and invade. Starbucks lands on Earth in the backyard of a typical suburban American house. However, on Earth, he's teeny tiny. And a 4 or 5-year-old girl who lives in that house named Cindy finds him and thinks he's a cute animal that she'll make a pet out of. So she takes him inside away from the ship before he can send the signal. So now the premise is that he's trying to escape from her and get to his ship so he can send the signal to the fleet so they can start the invasion. And Cindy is completely oblivious to the fact that she is unwittingly holding an alien warlord hostage and preventing the destruction of the Earth. A lot of people have been comparing this to the Buttons and Mindy segments from the original show, because there is kind of a similar dynamic there. I will say that I like this a bit better than the Buttons and Mindy segments, because I feel like the slapstick that befalls Starbucks is kind of deserved. He is a tyrannical, murderous alien warlord after all, not a protective pooch who's trying to do the right thing and gets scolded at the end for it. But it doesn't quite feel like it belongs here, for a number of reasons. Like, the art style is completely different, which isn't in and of itself the deal breaker, but it is a little jarring to see the Warners and Pinky and the Brain have this specific style throughout the rest of the show, and then suddenly there's an art shift for this, and it looks like it came from a completely different series. So there's that, but that in and of itself, like I said, not the major issue. The main reason it feels out of step is because it doesn't feel like it has the same range as the other characters. Part of what makes Animaniacs work is the fact that the characters are universally adaptable. They have their default settings, but you can technically put them anywhere, and their basic characters and basic formula will still work in that setting. Since everyone's comparing Starbucks and Cindy to Buttons and Mindy, let's use them as our examples. The premise of Buttons and Mindy is that you have a dog trying to protect a child who has wandered away from the place where she would be safe and into an area which is dangerous, and he's protecting her while also taking everything that would have killed her. So, with that premise, You can put that anywhere. Default is a suburban house, kind of near a more metropolitan area, but you can technically move that premise to outer space, or the Mesozoic era, or the merry old land of Oz, and it still works there. If you think it works. Again, not a fan of those segments. But with Starbox and Cindy, the premise is a bit more specific. The premise requires you to have that backstory in place, and I don't know if that can translate as well to other regions, so it's gonna be limited going forward. Not to an extreme, of course. It's not like they can't leave that setting. I can't think of other places they can go, but they're not gonna be able to, say, transpose that to Mars or to Middle Earth or something. It's got to stay in that specific region. Is that gonna work? Is that gonna fit in with the rest of the show? At the moment, it doesn't feel like it really does. But maybe it could. It could have potential. So I don't know about that one. It feels out of place, but it's not necessarily bad. The other new character I saw, I wish I could see you guys, so I could see your expressions when I say the title, The Incredible Gnome in People's Mouths. Yes, that is what it's called. The premise, as explained to us through an opening that satirizes the 1970s Incredible Hulk TV series opening, is that you had a guy who was trying to unlock the secrets of immortality, scientifically experimented on himself, and that transformed him into an angry gnome. Like pointy hat, bushy beard, garden variety gnome. And now he goes around and lives in people's mouths so he can pop out and say whatever is on their mind in certain situations because it's a cartoon, don't question it. This is a weird one. This is just plain bizarre. Again, different art style, but again, that's not really the deal breaker here. It's... Ironically, this one actually does have the potential to be more versatile than the Starbox and Cindy ones, but I don't like it. I don't really think it worked. Part of what's throwing me, I think, is the fact that he has an origin, and that origin does not explain a single thing about the show's main premise. Like, scientist trying to become immortal turns into a gnome, okay. Why does he now live in people's mouths? How does he fit in there? Why does he feel the need to do that and scream at everyone? It doesn't make sense. It either needed a very different backstory or else it needed no backstory at all. Just present it without an explanation and just have people try to accept it as it is. But even if that had been the case, I don't think I would like this segment because it's not funny. It's loud and obnoxious, certainly, but it's not really funny. It's just loud and weird. Both of these segments kind of feel like they were original ideas that had nothing to do with Animaniacs originally. The writers maybe had these thoughts. They wanted to try pitching them to Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon or Disney or one of those major networks at some point. But when they landed the Animaniacs job, they figured, well, since we've got a lot of space with none of the other characters returning, we'll slip these in and see what people think. If I had to guess, that would explain a lot. But I don't know that they really fit. Again, the Starbox and Cindy ones, that's the stronger premise of the two. But do either of them really belong here? I do not know. I don't necessarily think they do. If they do keep them, they have to undergo some pretty massive changes. And I don't necessarily know what those changes would be, per se. But at the moment, I just don't think they work all that well. In the end, the Animaniacs reboot feels like it's just sort of doing what was done before, but not necessarily with the same level of enthusiasm. Which, actually, saying that doesn't quite sound right. I'm sure the people who are working on this really are trying to do their best, and they probably were really enthusiastic about doing it, but the result doesn't quite feel like it's gotten there yet. There's potential for it to get there. Really, there is. But will it? That is the question. As of season 1, I feel like it does have its moments, but overall it's just sort of, I can take it or leave it. I'm much more motivated to continue rewatching the original series as opposed to ever coming back to this. But who knows? I've only seen some of the episodes. It's possible I missed some that were absolutely brilliant and would have won me over. But I can only tell you what I've seen. And what I've seen just leaves me kind of feeling like it's okay. It's nothing really special. But given that I'm saying that about Animaniacs, that almost feels worse than saying it's bad. Well, that's just where I stand at the moment. Again, I've only seen so much of it, but I'm in no rush to see more of it. I would much rather go back and watch the original, and I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. So, until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni viewer saying, Mwah! Good night, everybody.
If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Like and subscribe, then go down to the description to find links to follow us on DeviantArt, Patreon, and Twitter. While you're there, you'll also find the Amazon links for the original novels Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, and The Occult Mafia. 2 books I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.